Hello again, Steve here, with a few words on the concept of what is the value of politics. And this, of course, is just opinions, but I'm going to try to use a few parodies or a few metaphors or examples, or similarities as other things. Well, politics is it comes from policy, basically, right? It's meant to be like a public policy or a body politic. It's a fake body that's created, which people claim to be a part of. It's like in Christianity, there's a term called the body of Christ, or the body of the church. It's all those who claim to be members of that are the body politic, if you will, of that church. Well, that's what, as I get it, that's what politic is really. But I remember years ago I was on the phone, not that many years ago, but I was on the phone down to the States, and there was some election going on or whatever at the time. And I happened to mention to the lady, because it was put on hold for a while, and they were coming and going, and we were just there, small talk for a bit while she was looking for something. And I asked her something about what do you think of the politics going on down there? And she paused and she said, well, you do know what politics stands for, right? What it really means. She goes, well, poly means many, and tick is that little thing that sucks your blood. So I think we can liken it to that. I mean, what good do we get out of a tick? Does a tick bring us anything of value? Does it innovate anything for us? Does it add to us? Well, from what I understand is a tick basically crawls up onto you very sneakily. It embeds itself in you, and it begins to suck your blood. And it may give you a very serious disease called Lyme's disease. Well, what does politics do? Politics, or the political ideology, if you will, kind of sneaks up on us. I mean, we didn't volunteer for it. Yes, we were born of our mothers, and we were given this document called a birth certificate. Our parents were anyway. And that was presumed to be our identity. So we didn't think about it too much. Just like when we're walking around in the bushes, we might not be thinking about a tick, but the tick is already there. We weren't thinking about it, but already this thing is there. And it becomes, we think that it's almost like a part of us. That tick embeds itself, and unless we find it, we don't even feel it. Ticks, that's amazing about them. I've had a few ticks before and don't even feel them in bed, or they're very, very sly that way. And that birth certificate is it's like a feudal document. It's basically, when we use it, it's like the ancient system of pledging. We pledge ourselves to the body politic. We say, yes, I am this. This represents me within that body politic. The tick doesn't add anything to us. It takes from us. That is what the body politic does, because it says now that you are what we created. So you are less than you were. So it's you minus something. You're no longer man or woman. You're now person, which is a corporate entity which you are now vested in, right? And so it doesn't add, it takes. And in fact, it can infect us with a very serious disease, just like probably more serious than Lyme's disease, which is a mental delusionary disorder, which is akin to serious religiosity, because we believe in fantasies then, and we believe, without thinking too much, that we are owned by somebody else or other people. We have to ask permission in order to live. In order to work, we have to get a number. in order to travel on the roads which nobody claims to own. We have to ask permission for that. At least that's the, and that is a very serious mental handicap, I would say. It is a mental disorder in a way. We're disordered by the delusion, by the darkness, by this entering into this small mindedness. So I liken it to a tic. And of course, this is where I depart from the tic, because the politic is a much more intelligent tic. Because even though it doesn't invent anything, create anything, doesn't have any wealth, it's clever enough to use the wealth of others. And this is where we go back to the tic, of course. The tic doesn't create anything. It's just a bloodsucker, right? And that's what the politic is like as well. It doesn't create anything. Think about all the rules and regulations that are brought forth, things like seat belts and catalytic converters and whatnot. None of that was invented by the politic. The seat belts, the catalytic converters, these were invented by industrious men, largely, who wanted to be able to improve their products for the market. And then they are either they're adopted by lobbyists who want to somehow use their force rather than negotiation. They don't want to negotiate. They are antisocial people, right? They don't want to negotiate with somebody, so they want to use the gun of law, the so-called law, to make everybody use these things. So and often it's the industry itself, because they don't want to necessarily compete with others, so they try to get a monopoly through government, by lobbying the government to make it mandatory that you buy their product. So that's another clever little thing that they do. But there's all kinds of innovations that are co-opted and stolen, and co-opted or legislated to be used, all the way from the legislation of Chinese people as not human, or not deserving of being considered human, to the legislation of seatbelts, to the legislation of all kinds of idiotic ideas like we're a more superior race, and therefore we have the right to kill you because you're on the land that we call barren, but when we show up there's people who kind of look like human beings, but they're not, because they're not white and they're not Christians. So therefore we have this God-given right, we have this fantasy right to be able to kill you and move you out of the way because you're a nuisance. And these things are stolen ideas, of course, but then they're warped. Just like when they steal any other idea, they steal the seatbelt idea. It wasn't there to be put in to force everybody to use it. It was there because somebody didn't want to fall out of his old biplane, or when he was taken off, so he would bounce out of his cockpit or something. Somebody used it for a practical reason, then it's imposed upon everybody else for another reason. Now it's the same thing with all this nonsense, racism and so on, that is put forward, and classism that's put forward by the politic. It's convenient because it's a way of stealing, basically. It's a convenient way of eventually putting propaganda forward, saying Team Us is great, all those other guys not so. This flag is good, all those others are not so. So therefore this flag can go bomb this flag, and we can kill those people because somehow they have that flag and we have this flag. And it's going on today, 2015. There are airplanes flying around the Middle East bombing people, right? And it's because they have that flag and they have a disagreement. And even though it was us who stirred up the hornet's nest very often, or at least were involved, it's still okay. But all this is based on the way the politic can get away with it, of course, is to convince enough of the politic, enough of the people who have vested themselves in the politic, called citizens and voters, and people who are deluded enough to join at these psychopaths in believing their propaganda. the propaganda of things such as, way back when, I'm talking a while back, like around the Hitler's time, right, and before, Darwin had come up with this scientific theory, which is, and a scientific theory is not just a kind of a guess, it's basically as certain as you're going to get in science, until somebody else proves it wrong, that all of life evolved and continues to evolve. And therefore, there's this survival of the fittest. So then it was convenient to say, oh, okay, that applies to across the human races, and maybe it does, but no evidence. These guys weren't scientific guys like Theodore Roosevelt and Hitler and so on, who were basically of the same ilk. They had this theory that, hey, if this guy was saying that, and it's all popular, and it's in the science, and it's in the media, hey, that's a convenient truth. So we'll just warp it a bit, and because we have the title honorable, we'll just tell people this, that it's the truth, and we'll get all the ignoramuses called public school teachers to teach it there, and to teach it in Yale and Harvard and so on, and the priests to talk about it and so on, and it'll become the truth. You tell a lie enough times, it'll become the truth. So they will use that to say, okay, then, we're the most evolved. We're more evolved than the Chinese. We're more evolved than the Indians and the Mexicans and the blacks in Africa and so on. And therefore, we have the God-given right, because after all, if you blend them together, even though Darwin had nothing to do with it, even though he had to say he was Christian, probably otherwise he wouldn't have been taken serious, to blend it together and say, okay, it was God who must have created this evolution, and therefore God is telling us something. God is telling us that we must do God's will and go over there and take those barren lands, because those base people are just above animals. And that's theft. Okay, it's theft of an idea, but it's the convenient use of a theft of an idea, warping an idea, to then go forth and create atrocities. And Hitler did the same thing. I mean, he used Nietzsche's information. Nietzsche, for the longest time, was considered this big racist, because Hitler somehow got a hold of his works and warped it up a little bit, because he was a popular philosopher at the time, right? He was popular enough so that he could then take it. So my bottom line, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is I'm going off on tangents here, is that politic is not much different than the monotic, right? The monotic sneaks up, starts sucking, you hardly notice it until it's a part of you. And it draws from you, doesn't give anything, and it could end up just giving you a very, very serious disease. And there's a similarity there, I would say, with the way things are in politics of no matter where we are. If it's coercive politics, that is to say, where people are not expressly given the choice to join a corrupt organization or not join a corrupt organization. Now, they're not all created equal, right? Just like certain ticks are going to carry some really serious shit, there are certain political bodies which are more draconian and they are more diabolical than others, yes. But they all have the same aspect of, if we really were given full information from the get-go, we wouldn't want them. We wouldn't want them. We fundamentally, I think, want to be free, but we get warped into it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome. We're so used to our betrayers and our violators that we end up supporting them. And of course, even if we get to think about it, but most of us don't even actually get to think about that, because we're just told over and over and over and over again that these people are honorable and that they represent us. But they don't. I mean, to study history, politicians, they don't represent you. And I mean, certainly, if you look at the British parliamentary system that claims this area, they don't. The representatives, the ministers of the government are ministers of, a minister is a servant. They're not servants of those who voted. Remember, it's called a poll, right? It's just a survey, basically. If they do a survey, they call it an election. It's basically a survey of who you think is best to be the servant of who? Of the Queen, right? Because the Queen, in her coronation oath, she swears to govern over the people of a whole list of places. And the guy who's elected, then, he doesn't have, after he's been elected, he doesn't have to, that's not enough. It's not enough that a whole bunch of people in this survey called an election said he's the one or she's the one. No, still got to go ask for permission from who's really running the place. So, politics and ticks, not a lot of difference. I think that the politic is much more dangerous because there's many ticks, right? Greater chance of being infected. And of course, there is a lot of infecting going on. And I think the worst of all is the ideas that are adopted, the convenient ideas. You know, the economic system, a Keynesian economic system, for example, proven over and over and over again to be just complete disaster and nonsensical, irrational system of, you know, let's go break a bunch of windows so that we can create an economy. The broken glass argument, right? That's what this is. It's like, let's go into debt and spend and spend and spend and spend, and that will somehow create an economy. That's the Keynesian approach. And that is the unanimous system that politic gone awry, gone corrupt, eventually goes to. And all politic, government politic, is inherently corrupt. That's all it is. It'll get away with as much as it can. Limited government only lasts so long, because limited government, if there's very little government, provided that people are a little bit philosophical, absolutely flourishes. And when it flourishes, tax revenue somehow sneaks in, lawyers get in there, the corrupt class, the new priestly class gets in there, and they begin, and the ticks grow and grow and grow until you get to a point where there's too many ticks for hosts, and then eventually it'll implode. And they'll be like the little lemmings, right? The lemmings, there's too many lemmings all of a sudden. So then they just have to drive themselves off a cliff. They have to collapse. And because, I mean, if you have a society that where 1% is the tick class, well, people can get by, right? 10%, 20%, and so on. But when you have 60 or 70%, which gets approached in some places, it no longer survives. There's not enough blood left to suck on. So it's something to be aware of. And in terms of quality of our lives, well, just understanding, because politics is a big thing, right? We hear about it all the time. You turn on the news, pick up any newspaper, it's mostly politics. It is mostly politics. I challenge anybody to correct me on that. Especially the first section. It's mostly politics. So it's very, very huge in society, especially now. And it's an example of just lots of blood to suck on. And because, I mean, a population of any organisms like ticks will grow in proportion to the food available. And politics is the same thing. It'll grow in proportion to the food available. So there's a good economy because there's a low level of political influence, interference. It'll grow vastly, and there'll be lots of resources, lots of blood to suck on. And once the sucking starts, then a growing class of ticks, well organized, will create legislation favorable to certain business interests and so on, and the flow of cash and all kinds of bribery and everything starts flowing in, and then it grows further and further and further, and then the payoffs start happening with all the welfare classes. They're all being paid off to make sure that the surveys are kept strong for certain industries. Surveys, once again, code word for voting and elections. And of course, once that happens, there's more dependent classes, and it grows and grows and grows and grows, and eventually everything's just crawling with ticks. It'll collapse. Many of the ticks will die out, go into hibernation until the blood level comes up again, the economy comes back up again, the work ethic comes back up again, the productivity comes back up again, real productivity. And then the thieving and the sucking will start again. Improving the quality of our lives. Well, considering these things, understanding these things, we get to understand human nature. We get to understand our own nature, because I would say that within each and every one of us, there is that tick. There is that tendency to want to just suck off of somebody else. Perhaps suck off somebody else too sometimes, but I didn't mean to say that. But to take rather than actually earn. And when we learn to earn, there seems to be a greater satisfaction in life. And I think it's a more wholesome, a more wellness approach to life. And I'm going to start talking more about that too. It's wellness. That is I think it's an important word for life in terms of quality of life, is wellness. So the more honest we can be, the more industrious we can be, the more giving we can be, the more creative we can be, the more well we are. I don't think the approach of the tick behavior is a particular healthy way of life in terms of wellness. What do you think? Politic or no politic? Steve here again, great chatting. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.